But I have some excellent breaking news for you all. As you all know, the Olympics just ended. We're in the midst of election season. We have all these things going on in our country, so it's with a very serious and heavy heart I tell you that DraftKings is no longer adding a surcharge. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bettor Sports Show. I'm Ryan. I'm here with Randy. Randy, how you doing this evening?
Ryan, doing fantastic. Can't complain if I wanted to. How we doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm from Massachusetts, so I can complain at any moment on any day. I have you covered there. But I have some excellent breaking news for you all. As you all know, the Olympics just ended. We're in the midst of election season. We have all these things going on in our country, so it's with a very serious and heavy heart I tell you that DraftKings is no longer adding a surcharge. They're winning bets, and the four states where they plan to do so, they saw the backlash and they backed off. Gentlemen, that is gigantic. George Washington just gave us a fucking thumbs up in his grave right now. This is what the founding fathers wanted for this country. And this shows that you, the little man, the consumer, the guy who can vote with their wallet, made a difference. They saw the backlash and they backed off accordingly. So I think that's just an excellent piece of news to start the show with, especially in the current sports betting market where the average guy kind of gets fucked over by the big corporation, the sports book, the casino, etc. That's one for the slipper right there. One for the skipper.
Again, you flat out love to see it. I'm a bit of a gamer myself, and I would say that's probably like probably the only other niche where you really see that in action and possible where community backlash really can revert some policies before they go into action. Um, I had a feeling once I saw this news, I saw it about 2 weeks ago, that there were rumbles of them introducing that policy again. I had a feeling from the beginning too. I mean, at this point, sports betting is so popular. The notion of a fee off of your winnings, where it's hard enough to win, come on now, being a little greedy. So you like to see the public take a W when they can take it.
Exactly right. They always say fade the public. Well, the public came up strong in this one. Now, let's jump right into the show. First off, for me, this is fantasy football drafting season for myself and many of you. And as you know, that's one of the biggest things we do as people here. We draft our fantasy team, we sweat it out over the course of the year, waiver wire pickups, trades with that one guy who always tries to fuck you over in a trade thinking he's fucking Danny Ainge, always rejecting his trades, and all the fun that goes into it. So, here are some very basic tips I have for you in order to do well at your draft. First off, the most common thing I see that's a mistake is the run on QBs. Inevitably, during your draft this year, someone's going to reach on Mahomes. But somebody else is going to see that and be like, well, fuck, he just took Mahomes. I have to take a QB now. Next guy will take Lamar. Next guy will take Jalen Hurts. And so on and so forth. So after like no QBs go in like the first round or two, in the third round, somebody will reach and people panic and they start drafting QBs. You don't need to do that based off of positional value and depth. You don't need to take a QB that early, nor do you need to take a QB just because the guy before you took one, right? Anytime you see those big name guys flying off thinking, well, fuck, I need one of them. Nope, you don't. When it comes to quarterbacks, you can always find an excellent fantasy producing guy in like the projected 7 to 8, maybe even 10 to 12 tier, and you can just ride on that. So don't get all antsy because you see somebody take a big name QB. Next, recency bias. If someone has a good year last year, people have that in their mind. They want to draft them again. Likewise, if somebody has a shitty year, they're wary of them. So if someone had a bad year last year, you can get them as a very low, or at least lower than they should be, average draft position. And of course, the opposite is true. If someone absolutely tore it up last year, their draft position is going to be inflated. An example of that is Puka Nakua on the Rams. Even with the injury, people are going to see that absolutely stunning breakout performance. They're going to want to draft him. And on the other side, I think that the Jets receivers, of course, due to the quarterback situation there, underperformed. Garrett Wilson's a guy I really have my eye on. I think he's going to have an excellent season. Jamar Chase is another one. That's obvious. It's a no duh. But just one to mark that one down. Javonte Williams for me is another buy low spot. I think he's really going overlooked, especially with the talent he has there. And his backup, Jaleel McLaughlin. I think the Broncos offense, which is supposed to be anemic coming into this year, could actually have a lot of value, at least from a fantasy standpoint. because that's what you want when you're drafting in fantasy, especially for like your depth guys, your second tier of guys. The guys on the bad teams, so to speak. Well, a quarterback on a bad team is going to be behind. They're going to need to be throwing, right? Running back on a bad team, they may not be getting as many reps, but if they can work in the shotgun formation, if they can catch out of the backfield for PPR leagues, that's good because they're going to want to be feeding them, you know, exploiting the defense if they're playing soft, getting those 4 yards, 5 yards to start off the down. You can go downfield with that. That's like 4 or 5 points in one drive. That can be very good for you. Another thing I look at is the overvaluation of defenses. Another very similar to quarterbacks. At least somebody is going to take a defense much higher than they should be, and people always like the name brand defenses. Steelers, Ravens, Browns. Feels weird to say Browns, as a kid who grew up watching football starting in the late 2000s and into the 2010s, but Browns D is very legit this year. What I would recommend you do is look at the strength of schedule on paper and draft that way. You want a defense that's going to be facing awful, shitty teams. That's especially true for your backup defense. I know there are people out there who just stream defenses on the waiver wire, just pick up a defense who's playing the bad team. Inevitably, there will be one out there, and just plug and play. I know in terms of strength of schedule, the Patriots, even though their defense is good, their strength of schedule is really hard. Likewise, the Falcons and the Chargers especially, you think of that as like a rebuilding team Harbaugh brought in to rebuild. Their strength of schedule on paper, pretty easy. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Also, just throwing this out there, I really like the Raiders myself. I've talked about that on previous episodes. I think that interior defensive line is going to be bonkers. And then the last little tip I have for you this year is this is just a personal bias of mine. Whether you're in a PPR league, this especially goes, and also just in general. When you're drafting early, it's always take the running backs first, right? Because there are so few bell cow running backs in the modern NFL. You have to get those high carry share guys before they go off the board. I like to build out a team based on three strong wide receivers, like two number one bona fide guys at the wide receiver spot, and then like a 1A, 1B guy as either your third receiver or your flex. That's how I like to build my teams because, of course, they have the potential where, they only need one or two catches a game. That can be a touchdown or it can be like an 80-yard bomb. And they just have that very high ceiling that I find sometimes running backs don't have. Also, in the modern NFL, I do think offensive line plays fallen off just a little bit. You have a bad O line, you have injuries on the O line, and we've had a lot of injuries. I'll throw that to you after I'm done with this one point. That running back, you can be an amazing running back, and you're just not going to have the daylight. You're not going to have the holes to punch through there. So that's just me. That's how I won my championships in fantasy. Going heavy on the wideouts. Ultimately, do what works for you. Now, Randy, tell us about what's going on with the Vikings and some of the other teams in the league.
Well, so first I'll say those are all pretty solid pointers regarding fantasy and just drafting. Um, I've never been too hardcore. I'm probably one of the people most late to the fantasy betting scene this year. Now that I feel a bit more seasoned and really taking care in my approach in the past 2 years of week to week betting during the season, this is probably going to be the first year that I dip in pretty deep into trying to evaluate pretty much to your point, what's the strategy here? How am I going to formulate the best team? The only thing that comes to mind that I would think of, since you had mentioned the Raiders, and don't get me wrong, I love the switch to the head coach. I love what they've done in the offseason there. I love their brand of defense, but their their quarterback room is arguably the worst. You got Gardner Minshew, which again, he's not a bad QB, but he by no means should he be the best QB on anybody's roster. And with that being the case, you got Aiden O'Connell behind him, Anthony Brown Jr., Carter Bradley, and Nathan Peterman. 99% of people have never heard of the other three. Very few. No, actually, the great play that Aiden O'Connell had offered last year. It was some impressive numbers and a couple impressive performances there in the second half of the season. But with that being said, a defense and the amount of time they got to be on that field due to an unproductive offense. We saw that last year with the Jets. Jets couldn't buy a first down no matter what that defense did. And ultimately, the Jets still ended up being a top 5 defense last year. But as far as points allowed, Very, very rare in the case, though, where you see a defense that they're back out there after 3 downs because their offense can't get a first down and 10, 11, 12 times a game. That's the only reason I wouldn't buy the hype right now on the Raiders. I would like to see the result of the first 3, 4 weeks, which of course you can't do that when we're talking about fantasy here. I would consider that a risky pick if we're leaning on Raiders defense just because of how troubled that offense looks with quarterback play. That defense is going to be exhausted on that field, and we'll have to see how that shakes out in the first half of the season. But that's my take there. But speaking of troubled offenses, right to your point before when you had mentioned the Vikings, just a series of unfortunate events over the summer. Their cornerback had passed away about a month, 2 months ago. Terrible car accident, super tragic. And then shortly after, wide receiver gets busted for a DUI, which is just overall a bad look for the team as a whole. Now you have the cornerback tearing the ACL first day of practice. Next cornerback, he gets injured the very next day. We have JJ. Very, very unfortunate. Me and you were both very hyped to see what he could offer this roster. And we will not even see a snap of that this year. And again, we see this every year in preseason and not even during the games. A lot of these major injuries for teams come in practice leading up to preseason. I would say probably again, and we're going to see a bit more of this over the next 2, 3 weeks. There will probably be 3, 4 hopeful superstars or current superstars suffer a season ending injury. And all the hype that we're talking about attributing to a team is going to be out the window before we even get to week 1. But so JJ tears his meniscus. He's absolutely done for the season. We'll be talking about him next offseason about getting his first snaps. And then Jordan Addison was carted off the field today during practice. So they're absolutely in shambles regarding the passing game right now. They're absolutely in shambles regarding passing defense. You hate to see it. Again, a lot of these, if anybody's going to pay attention to anything and start riding aside away from the fantasy conversation now, if we're just looking at, again, what we're preparing for our week 1 bets, Vikings look to be in some serious trouble. Might be a team, to my point before, where an offense struggling to get going is usually a big key to a defense underperforming. There's going to be bad drives let up, and the more times that defense has to trot out on that field more often, it's going to be troublesome. Vikings, in my opinion, a couple weeks ago, I saw them potentially being in at best a 10-7 team, but definitely scratching the surface of 500. I thought JJ was going to bring a lot of energy to this team. Very unfortunate to see, again, out for the season due to a practice injury.
Mm-hmm. And looking around the NFL, we also have some other injury news. We see Jahmyr Gibbs. He got hurt. We saw also a quick note, a quick aside. Matthew Judon, if you're seeing this, is going to get traded to the Patriots. Yeah, traded to the Patriots. Jesus Christ, going to get traded to the Falcons from the Patriots. Most likely, it looks like they could not come to an agreement there. He'll most likely be going down there for a third-round pick. Puka Nacua was injured this offseason as well, but they do think he's going to be ready for week 1. So that's another thing, whether you're playing fantasy, whether you're looking for betting on week 1 props, or, you're just looking to keep your ear to the ground as a hobbyist, see who gets banged up in the preseason. Because getting banged up in the preseason, then going into the regular season, you're already kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of recovery and things like that. That can be rough. Another tip I have for you is, and it's a little boring, but either look online or scroll through Twitter and see who's playing the majority of snaps for these teams, especially at wideout. Wideout's a position where it's heavily, heavily dependent on formation usage, of course, thinking, yeah, duh. But the wideout can't even begin to be involved in the play if they're not on the field. And of course, if they're like getting the wide receiver 3 snaps, that's very different in terms of like scheming than a wide receiver 1 would be able to get. Of course, wide receiver 1, the ball's going to be going to them a few times a drive. You're going to be looking to feed them. Wide receiver 3 or 4, you have to maximize your opportunities. One that sticks out to me, Tyquan Thornton on the Patriots. He's been surpassed on the depth chart. He's down low now, so I'm curious to see how that plays out. And yeah, just keep a lookout for that because you don't want to draft a guy or bet on a guy who is just not even going to be on the field the majority of the time. So yeah, just be small little preparatory things you can do in the off season that the average person probably doesn't want to do. They're a little boring. They're a little tedious, not gonna lie. But that's kind of how life works sometimes. If you do the boring shit nobody else wants to do, that can pay off for you in the long run. So that's just another general tip I have for you there.
And again, right, it all comes down to, what are we betting for? Are we betting for entertainment? Are we betting casually? Or are we really seriously doing unit tracking and really analyzing value and have a goal marker that we're aiming for month to month? Biggest thing I would say is, again, when it comes to NFL betting too, just to the point of injuries before, these are major injuries that we're talking about. Many more injuries are currently listed if you look at any team's injury report. And I would probably say, right, before whenever your fantasy draft night is, even just on a general note, scroll through a few teams where you have an offensive player in mind and see if there's any major offensive line injuries and what the injury report looks for on that. Chances are, again, does it go the other way? Sure, but more often than not, a team with major offensive line injuries, uh, it's going to stall production more than most people think. A lot of people look for the big name injury, the big wide receiver, or the running back, the tight end. A lot of people kind of disregard how impactful offensive line is. And to your point earlier, right, it seems like offensive line play has gone down over the past couple of years. You could also make the argument again. It's very hard for these guys to stay healthy in a now 17 game regular season. If team starts with a banged up line early on in the year, again, very questionable to look at an offensive production standpoint there.
Mm-hmm. Offensive line is the nucleus of the entire offense. It's not the flashiest position, so of course it doesn't get the media attention,
A little
right?
boring. It's going to be a little bit boring,
Eh,
but they serve a large purpose there, again as a Jets fan, and it just comes to mind immediately. I mean, they had 12 different guys, I believe, start on offensive line last year. Number one component to the Aaron Rodgers injury early on, and the quarterback carousel that they have. Regardless of the talent at the quarterback position, it doesn't mean a damn thing if they can't be protected, and we saw that all year last year with quarterback injuries. Again, might be boring. It's not flashy. We're not talking about top 10 wide receivers. We're talking about, left guards and right tackles. But again, you want to look at a direct correlation to offensive efficiency and just overall big numbers. It's going to be attributed directly to a healthy offensive line.
a great example of that a few years ago, the Cowboys' offensive line was so good you could put any running back behind them and they would have a 100-yard game.
Yeah.
That's the impact a good offensive line can have.
Yeah.
And offensive
Absolutely.
line's another one of those positions where you only hear about it if it's bad. If it's good, you hear about the quarterback, the running back, and the receivers. But if it's bad, oh
Yep.
boy, that's just gonna stymie any type of offense you're gonna try to get going there. Your drives will all die before the 50. Now that was a lot of
Absolutely.
pro ball. Just throwing this out there for college football. Georgia Tech on the spread against Florida State is going to probably be my first play of a college football season. I absolutely love this for a few reasons. It's a neutral site with travel in Dublin, Ireland. I think that favors the underdog. We saw last year Northwestern, I believe they beat Nebraska straight up in a very competitive game. That was essentially Scott Frost's death knell for the program. We saw that. On top of that, Florida State is not returning many of their top tier guys. They're losing a lot of production to the draft or a transfer portal. And while they have brought some other guys in, of course, I do think there are going to be some holes on that roster. On the other hand, Georgia Tech has returned a lot of their players from last year, especially on offense. I think they've kept that same offense, and we saw them be competitive against some very big boy programs under that new system there. So just throwing it out there, I like Georgia Tech getting the 12, and 12 is a weird number because think
Yeah,
about it. That's a
for
lot of
sure.
That's a lot of comfort if you're betting the favorite there. They only need to win by like 13. 13's a football number, or 2 touchdowns, which traditionally big ranked program like Florida State, unranked Georgia Tech team, you would expect 2 touchdowns there. 12. It reminds me of the opening spread, Clemson versus Duke last season when Duke beat them straight up, and it was a 12.5 point spread. And I
Hmm.
saw that and I went, hmm, hmm, okay. I don't know. My spidey senses are tingling. My instincts are going off. My alarm bells are pretty good when it comes to college football, especially. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm the lunatic you've been looking for. But, but, college football's back, and that's what matters.
I hear that. I'm gonna have to get a little bit more versed. This is gonna be my year for sure to really lock in. Uh, Again, not saying it's gonna be a great performance year for me as far as college football, but definitely looking to add that to my line of focus on the 4 or 5 sports I already do bet on pretty much daily. College football, definitely not one to play around with though. I'll be following it closely. I got nothing to add for you in that field. Um, but MLB, I'll touch on it really quick. Um, Really, more or less, no division recap, uh, no quick hitting updates for you today, other than major injury, I guess, for the Yankees. Jazz Chisholm is headed to the IR, uh, elbow injury. That's about all we know so far. We won't know the extent of that for about 10 more days. So the only person really that signed with a team at the trade deadline that was a major key addition to a team, uh, performing great and out to injury. So a little bit of an outlier there. Bad news for the Yankees. In the middle of a sketchy series right now with the White Sox too, so it comes at a very strange time. But outside of that, and this is just on my end personally, how I've been betting over the past 2 weeks. Definitely for the month of August, I'm writing this down because I saw the same thing last year and was able to catch it right on time this year, and it showed this week. As far as units are concerned, it's been about a plus 40, plus 50 unit week, which is incredible for anybody, no matter what your unit size is. And all I've simply been doing is really looking at underdog close matchups and going with the alternate run total. Anything between 4 and 6, anything higher than that, it's about a half unit or a quarter unit sprinkle. And it has yielded me tremendous results. Again, a lot of these games, you take an underdog, and for them to score again over 4.5 or over 5.5, you're in a lot of these cases you're looking at plus 220 to plus 340, which is absolutely ridiculous value. I have a feeling we will not see this again next MLB season with just how offense has evolved over the past 2-3 years for the MLB. Again, a team scoring 7, 8, 9 runs, and again, it not even being a blowout. Some of these games are highly contested and high scoring games. We saw that a couple weeks ago with the Yankees Red Sox series. I believe it was about 48 runs cumulative between both teams scored in a 3-game span. That's absolutely absurd. You won't see 3 games combined for that total points for 2 great defensive teams in the NFL. I mean, we're talking about unbefore seen numbers in the MLB. Did this happen before on occasion? Yes. At this point, on a daily basis, we're seeing teams score anywhere from 8 to 12 runs, and it's not even a shocker. It doesn't have to be a top 10 team. I believe the A's have the single season record for this season right now with the most runs scored. I believe it was 21 or 22 against the Orioles, which even just right there, right? Big underdog against arguably a top 5 team out of nowhere, exploding for 20 runs. And again, so what have we seen all through August here? A lot of very obvious matchups that you would think you would lean in the favorite direction, and it simply doesn't go that way. August baseball is very weird. Post trade deadline, the bad teams are playing harder, or maybe they made acquisitions, or maybe they gave away some of their better players. But now this team has better chemistry for no real reason. Again, and I could point to the White Sox series currently against the Yankees. They exploded for 10 plus runs the other night, and these guys look like they're playing ball for a division clinching spot. Red Sox had 29 wins going into that game against the Yankees, and the Yankees at this point in the season are not a team that should be losing even a game to the White Sox, let alone giving up that many runs. And which, again, obviously a big underdog in that game. I want to say they were probably plus 240. That wasn't an alternate total that I had played. But nonetheless, to not at least sprinkle, forget about money lines, to not at least sprinkle any team on any night, really. And over 4.5 and over 5.5 is almost absurd at this point. For the value that you're getting on underdog odds, again, we're not talking about a lack of scoring really on any team. Is it going to happen every night? No. But again, even just before we started tonight's episode, just taking a look at some of the scores today, we saw the Diamondbacks, right? They got crushed. Well, maybe not crushed, but game one took quite a beating from the Rockies. Again, one of the not elite teams in the league for sure. And the Diamondbacks have been red hot lately. And again, they could give up a large number of runs to the Rockies. And then today, put up 11 plus runs. I hit that live wager earlier. And again, so the over 9.5 line, which I was very close to playing that for a unit today, because just me personally, third game in the series, Diamondbacks against a far inferior team. All the weird stuff has happened already. The Diamondbacks absolutely should have scorched the Rockies for 10 plus runs today. For them to score over 9.5, that was at plus 750. First inning, they score 3 runs. I jump on it live, the over 9.5, and it was at plus 196. That still cashes. Did I miss out on tremendous value? Yes, but I still was able to grab tremendous value simply just looking at teams' individual alternate total runs. So, some people refer to this as the dead season in sports. Seems like every handicapper on Instagram just does not like betting MLB, and I can't imagine why. There was so much data out there and so much time to lay off, rebuild a bankroll if you had a bad run, or again, half unit plays stack. We have very long slates every day. To not even take a peek at what kind of potential there is in scoring props for MLB. For me, it's been great. I highly recommend anybody else who's afforded small units to take a look at it. There is money to be made in this dead season right now. I won't even go off about tennis because that's a bit new under my belt in the past 6 months that I've been slowly working on. I have a system I've developed there, but keeping it to the mainstream audience here, as far as MLB, keeping your eye on underdogs right now, or at least in the future, post trade deadline, August baseball, underdog heavy, hot offense. That's pretty much what I got for you on the MLB side.
And speaking to the volatility I saw last night, Tigers versus Mariners, the total was like 6.5, 7.5, and the Tigers put up fucking 17 or some shit.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. So actually, one more. There was a game last week. Again, I did not play it. I had to play separate to that. That was at the same time slot, and I try not to send 2 money lines that are crossing time schedules, if that makes sense. So I already had my initial play in, but then I noticed that I forgot which team they were playing, but correct, right? That total was set to 6.5. And I'm like, gee, let me look at the alternate total for the Tigers to score over 4.5 runs. And we've seen what they've done all year. They have exploded on runs, at least on innings 1 through 5, 20 plus times this year, at least. They're just a hot team in general. Over 4.5 runs was in the area of like plus 250, plus 260. I'm like, you kidding me? Normally, I would have thrown a unit on there, about $20, $25. I did not. They went on to score 6 runs that game. I was looking at yesterday. My play was the A's over 6.5, which cashed, but I was all day looking at that game total for Tigers and how it's just way too low. It's just way too low. And wouldn't you know, uh, Tigers had, I think, 11 runs, right, in the first 5 innings. I'm not sure if that's what you said, but I mean, again, and the value that's there. I'm not saying to go all the way up to 7.5 or 8.5, but if you're getting underdog odds on a team to score 5 runs, how often do we see a team score 4 or 5 runs in a single inning now in baseball? I mean, it happens almost every game, and especially, last thing I'll add, across the league, there's not a single team that has good relief pitching. I challenge you to find me one. There is not one. Every team in the league has very wishy-washy relief pitching. So with these totals, it doesn't even matter if the ace is in. That ace comes out, a team is liable to let up 4, 5, 6 runs, innings 6 through 9. More often than not, it seems, especially in late summer baseball.
Yeah, late summer baseball is just straight up different. I've talked about it on my page as well. Baseball is a very volatile sport with a number of games, and once you add in all the factors of late August baseball, right, you really got to know your shit, do your research, and love those underdogs. Play the anthem for the underdog because, like he said, all these changes happen. Maybe they did trade some guys away, but the guys they have coming up from the farm system are young and hungry, and they want their
Yeah.
opportunity, and they're going to be showing up.
And they're playing for contracts, right? And everything else. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that's baseball, baby. Right? You have to have some tolerance for the discomfort, for the underdogs, the wagers on the totals where it looks like, oh, I don't know about that one, stuff like that. And there's a lot of money to be found there.
well, and it's back to your point that you've said a couple times in previous episodes. It pays to be a contrarian asshole sometimes. I'm
Yep.
telling you, though. I still look at numbers. I don't really ever go straight off of vibe. But for example, yesterday my play when I gave out over 6.5 on the A's, half of that reasoning is the A's at plus 220 against the Mets, who have been pretty streaky, but we're going to completely count this team out, especially on the run total. When again, I won't count a team out that can put up 20 against the Orioles. So just for that sole fact alone, and how many times we've seen the Mets have a inning 6 through 9 collapse throughout the season, you know, it's hard to pass up. And again, right, most people are going to look at that and be like, yeah, no way, plus 220. They're not scoring. All right, I'll drop my unit on it and we'll see. And then what happens? That pays out 6 units for one bet. To make climbs like that, very hard to do with value that's anything higher than minus 120. You need to really string together 4, 5, 6 wagers in a row to win for one of those to cash. Again, it's a forewarning. I don't think we will see these odds be this juicy again next year. I do not think we will.
So yeah, gotta strike while the iron is hot. And then just to recap the show, we talked some NFL fantasy drafting. We talked a little bit of college football. Updated you on the injuries in the NFL world. We just did a lot of baseball there, so that's good for like the current of the big four sports currently going on. We're still a little ways out from jumping into hockey or NBA. So for me, that wraps it up. That's all I got for tonight. Randy, you have anything you want to add?
Nah, that's all I got, man. Hope we get some good cashes in the next couple weeks leading up to NFL. Get that bankroll nice and fat.
Sounds good, boys. You have anything going on right now? Good luck on your bets, and as always, we'll see you next week. Peace.
Take it easy.
You got me feeling lucky. I'm putting everything on black.